So, was the Winnie the Pooh flu a plan to disrupt Trump's economy 2016 through 2020? Now, I'm a fairly strong believer in the idea of Positivism. Purpose purpose of a system is what it does. Um, Poverty program never actually brings people out of poverty, but seems to create conditions that justify its own existence. You can infer that the poverty and self justification are intentional design elements. Now, imagine you own a company. You direct the IT department to make a billing program. They do. Your company seems to have improved its efficiency greatly with a better billing notification and tracking. You judge the project a success because you're making more money. Your company seems to have improved its efficiency greatly with better billing notification and tracking. So let's say later on you perform an audit and you discover that someone in IT built a routine that subtracts all fractional pennies and diverts it to their bank account. The point is, it's possible for a system to have multiple purposes, all of which succeed to some level, even if they are competitive. In this case, efficiency and embezzlement. Without embezzlement, the billing program would be more efficient, but it's possible to be more efficient than it was previously while embezzling at the same time. So let's look at this bug itself and the timing of it. Now, one culprit could be China itself and the timing of it all. Now, China and the US had spent the previous 12 months prior to outbreak, December of 2019, locked in which could have been called a huge trade war. At least, at the very least, it was some of the tensest trade negotiations between countries within living memory. Now, timing and economics lean away from this idea, but there are some caveats. But China and the US had reached an agreement known as Phase One within weeks of the start of the flu. So this leads us to think that China probably had no vested interest in this happening at this point if they'd already reached an agreement. Second, cratering the US economy would have far greater negative impacts on China. And this is something they would very well know. Now, so this kind of points the smoking gun away from China. Not a, they definitely were the source, but I don't think they were intentionally going after the U.S. economy at this particular time. So that there isn't a the timing is just a coincidence, and the fact that they did it was probably more accidental. Now, however, there are caveats. First, China doesn't operate the way the U.S. does. They have a different idea of acceptable outcomes. So it's possible they were willing to take a huge blow to their economy in order to undermine Trump. They may have been willing to take a brutal hammering to shut him down. If something is planned, it doesn't always mean the timing of the plan is entirely in your control. So if they did plan to release this, which I don't think is the most likely outcome, but if they did, it may not have spread the way they expected it to. Viruses are unpredictable. One of the reasons why, theoretically, the United States no longer maintains a stockpile. Um, there also is a mismatch of the economic agreement versus the outbreak date, which is something that could have been circumstances beyond anybody's control. Also, a great deal of the lab funding was done under third party contractors. It's possible they had different goals than the Chinese. Thus, it may have been there's a possibility of an intentional release that wasn't directly the Chinese, but possibly the subcontractors. In short, I don't think the Chinese end of it was deliberate, but there are a lot of unknowns. All potential disaster events have people who plan for them to happen. For almost 10 years before the Winnie the Pooh flu, there were people going bonkers over the possibility of the avian virus jumping to humans. People, researchers, and think tanks get paid a lot of money by billionaires and governments to game out scenarios and create recovery plans for them. Now, some of these exercises are legitimate, if often unrealistic attempts to get ahead of the problem. Some are creeps who think a disaster is a great opportunity for change. Now, these pre planners were always ready to jump at a moment's notice. If this had turned out to be the Winnie the Pooh Flu 18 or the Winnie the Pooh Flu 20 rather than Winnie the Pooh Flu 19, you're following the years there. Basically, I'm saying if it had happened a year earlier or a year later, I think we would have seen many of the same results in terms of experts scurrying out from underneath the baseboards, shrilly hawking their pet plans and ideas. So, if we kind of take the whole China out of it as a deliberate cause, and we take the planners out as a deliberate cause, what remains are the strong differences between the red state and blue state lockdown ideologies. Two things that work against an incumbent strongly is unrest and a bad economy. What we can see during the Winnie the Pooh flu, blue areas were highly tolerant of unrest. However, if we look at this year in the lead up to 2024 election, there was near zero tolerance for unrest. And that lack of tolerance for unrest got stronger as the election got closer. Pretty much all the Palestine uh, protests got shut down quick, and they never were fed in the same way where they spilled out into the cities, destroying and burning things. So there seems to be an inverse leniency on protests based on which party was incumbent is probably not coincidental. So, point being is if blue areas were very tolerant of unrest when Trump was the incumbent, but not at all when Biden was the incumbent, um, that would seem to be more of a choice than an accident of circumstances. Now, it's pretty much accepted that many of the red states exited lockdown earlier than blue states. The economic result was that red states recovered far more quickly, economically, that is. Part of this can be attributed to risk aversion differences. Red state voters are willing to accept the risk associated with ending the lockdowns, whereas the blue state voters and government officials would tend to be more fearful of that kind of risk. Now, risk aversion can't account for all blue state decision making, though. Since each state went their own way, and I'm talking reds and blues, there are many models to evaluate and choose from. It's possible the same decision process that allowed protests to occur in the same places as the prolonged lockdowns indicates there's a good chance that part of the decision making process was based on keeping economies bad. In other words, if the excuse is that the blue states extended their lockdowns to save lives, that starts to ring hollow when at the exact same time they allowed protests and riots to occur, pretending that they couldn't spread the virus. So, if extending the lockdowns to save lives isn't the reason it was done, then there must be another reason. One possibility, and trust me, there are definitely more, but one possibility is that the blue states intended to tank the economy for Trump to make his election more difficult. Now, in closing, one of the things I want to bring up is I did a lot of very major generalizations on blue state, red state. There were a lot of states that kind of crisscrossed in the center, where some red states lagged behind blue states in terms of lifting the lockdowns, and vice versa. So, but there was a tendency of the red states to come out first, blue states after. But there's a few cases where blue states beat red states to the punch, and there's also a lot of back and forth argument over what constitutes the end of the lockdown. In some cases, certain orders were still in effect, but the people didn't really feel any effect. So you can't completely gauge when you say a state ended their lockdowns that it was actually being really enforced or followed at that point. So, but the tendency still holds. All right. So, in the comments below, what do you think about the Winnie the Pooh flu? Do you think the blue states deliberately tanked the economies to hurt Trump? Or do you think it's just call it an affectation of uh, the blue states enjoying the power, dragging things out, and perhaps even trying to save lives? Be interested in your thoughts. Tell me below. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithms brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, check out my other titles. I get into a lot of stuff. Odds are I'm talking about something you like. Uh, please subscribe. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.